Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Tuesday. Hopefully you guys are having a great start to your day. And thank you so much for tuning in to today's video, where we'll be taking a look at the latest in relation to Tropical Storm Harold, as it is now making landfall in the Gulfshore of Texas, from Corpus Christi back into Galveston, bringing heavy rainfall, damaging winds, and even the possibility of a couple tornadoes, beginning right now and into later on this afternoon and into the evening. We'll also be taking a look at the heat wave that's expected to impact much of the central United States, from the plains back into the Midwest. And I must say as a caveat that the heat wave has been present across this region, especially the plains, since Sunday. But we're really seeing that heat wave expand into other areas like the lower Great Lakes. We'll be giving you the latest in terms of record-breaking temperatures and where we might see those in this part of the country. And then we will also, at the end of our video, take a look at the upcoming weather pattern that will mean implications for many of us here in the lower 48 beginning early next week. So if you do enjoy today's video, be sure to like and subscribe, share with family and friends who will be impacted by these weather events, and be sure to check us out at prestigeweather.com. That information will be provided in the bio below, where we provide one-on-one weather consulting for only a monthly fee. So if you want more information on that, click on the link down below, and also be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. So before we take a look at Tropical Storm Harold and the latest that it's bringing to the Gulf Shore of Texas, let's take a broader scope and look at what's happening across the tropics. And we do have a couple of systems of concern that are currently forming off the shores of Africa. We do have a system of concern number 1, which has a 50% chance of development, and then system number 2, which is right around a 0 to 20% chance of development over the next several days. You notice, though, that at the moment, although we do have a lot of activity off the African shore, there really isn't much concern in the immediate term for any landfalls in the Atlantic shoreline. So we're going to continue to monitor this activity and really keep you guys posted, but keep in mind that this isn't an immediate concern right now for the lower 48. We also do have post-tropical storm Gert as well as tropical storm Franklin. Now, post-tropical storm Gert has dealt with a ton of wind shear on the leeward side of the Leeward Islands, for lack of a better term. And this storm is continuing to get sheared out. It is weakening, and that's going to actually move off to the north, and there is a slight chance that we do see that redevelop as it gets into the mid-Atlantic Ocean. Of course, that is a very low chance at the moment, but there is a possibility of that. And then with Tropical Storm Franklin, we do expect that to intensify later on in the next several days and potentially become a low-end hurricane. Just like with the two areas of convection off the Africa coast, both post-tropical storm Gert and tropical storm Franklin are expected to remain in the Atlantic Ocean and away from the shoreline, at least at this time. And as I mentioned, we'll keep you guys posted if anything changes on that front. And then finally, we have Tropical Storm Harold, which as of the 10 a.m. advisory, here is the latest on that. We do have sustained winds of 50 miles per hour, and it's moving to the west-northwest at 21 miles per hour. It's expected to be out of the southern Texas region by the end of the day today and eventually weaken, and we're actually seeing that weakening right now as it continues to move in that west-northwest direction into higher terrain of the Texas-Mexico border, where we expect this storm to eventually be weakened out due to the friction of that orography. Now, if we take a look at the latest right now with the system, though, a lot of heavy rainfall near the center, and you can see a nice little wall there, and I won't even call it an eye wall because this is not anywhere near hurricane status. We are at tropical storm status here. But you definitely do see your center of low pressure crossing over the Gulf Shore of Texas, making its way into Corpus Christi. And a lot of heavy rainfall on the northern edge of that. And we are seeing some areas of rotation, which we'll talk about here in a second. And as that system continues to move off to the west-northwest, I do anticipate that we may see some little spin-ups within that line of stratiform shower and thunderstorm activity embedded within this activity here, just closer to the western periphery of Texas. So extreme west central Texas near the Mexico border right in this area. Could expect to see a couple of those spin ups here later on this afternoon. These are going to be very weak tornadoes if any of them do touch down. I would really say that the main concern was going to be the sustained winds that we're seeing at 50 miles per hour with gusts up to 60 at times, as well as the potential for some flash flooding. And when you get a lot of this rainfall to move onto the Gulf Shore, you can get some what we call training. And what that means is as you continue to get waves and waves of showers and thunderstorms over the same areas, you can get very heavy rainfall rates. And one of the things that's not noted on here is that when we have these tropical systems move onshore, they typically carry very high PWatt values, in other words, precipitable water. And we're seeing that anywhere between 2.3 to 2.5 inches of precipitable water near the low. So there certainly is the potential for some flash flooding, maybe even seeing rainfall rates of 1 inch to 1.5 inches per hour on the conservative side for areas being impacted by Tropical Storm Harold. Now, we do have to take a look at the latest with the total rainfall amounts, and the models are actually in very much agreement with this. This is the latest HRRR 16Z. Much of the heaviest of rainfall is going to be in this vicinity of Texas, very extreme southern portions of Texas, with anywhere between really 3 to 6 inches of total rainfall accumulation, maybe even see higher amounts towards the higher elevations of the Mexico-Texas border. If we also look here at the NAM Nest, on the other hand, which is 12Z, keep that in mind, still showing the same rainfall amounts, although a little bit more farther to the south. And I want you to keep in mind that this is the 12Z, so this would have been a older model run. So the HRRR 16Z is a little bit more updated and with the reflective of the current trends with the radar. So I just want to make that point clear. But even with the 12Z run in mind, it still does show a heavy corridor of rainfall within extreme southern Texas. So we can expect really anywhere between 3 to 6, maybe even locally higher amounts beyond that 3 to 6 inch rainfall range for this region of Texas once it's all said and done. And we are seeing some flash flood warnings at the time of this video for the Gulf shoreline of Texas, right in this vicinity here. As I mentioned at the top of our conversation, though, not only do we have sustained damaging winds to worry about, but we also have to be concerned about a couple of tornado spin-ups. And the reason why that is because when you get these tropical systems to move through like Harold, although it is rather weak and it is weakening as of the time of this video, we still do have veering profiles. And these profiles are actually more clockwise. So what you're taking a look at right now is the latest hodograph, which tells us veering with height, as well as the strength of wind shear with height. So if we look here at the low levels, we certainly do see that near the center of the low pressure system, you have really strong veering starting pretty much easterly and then veering westerly. So remember, we have more of a clockwise rotation with these. But because of that, you can get these weak spin-ups because there is enough helicity in the area. There also is enough shear, surface and surface to 3 kilometer shear, to where you can get these weak tornadoes to produce. Now, because our low pressure system is weakening over time and it is starting to really deal with that land interference as well as the orographic influence, I do expect that the tornado threat is going to continue to diminish later on today. Although I would say that the tornado threat is going to shift west, as I mentioned before, for extreme west central Texas getting into the Mexican border. But I think the coverage on that is going to be very isolated because, as I said, our system is continuing to weaken. So I just wanted to bring that up to you guys and really bring home that point. We're not expecting to see widespread tornadoes like we might see with a more stronger tropical system making landfall, but there still does exist a tornado threat going forward later on today. And as I said, this system is expected to move into Mexico and eventually get essentially just weakened and sheared out by a lot of that orographic influence and terrain due to friction. Finally, I want to point your attention, though, to a sounding from this morning. And this is a forecasted sounding for that area of Texas. So extreme west central Texas. This was taken for the hour 21, I should say. And just to kind of drive home the point, here is your very strong low level wind shear. And you can see that denoted by your elongated wind vector. But notice that unlike what we might see with the traditional supercell setup for tornadoes, these winds are sort of in the opposite direction, right? We don't, we have more of that clockwise veering, but it's all the way on the other side of the photograph. So it's sort of flipped from what you might see with some of those classic supercell storms we see in the panhandle of Texas or places like the Plains. But that being said, this is still a veering profile with height. So that means that when we have veering, that can actually help to produce broad rotation within some of the more intense clusters of storms within Tropical Storm Harold. So we can certainly expect to see that later on today, and we've sort of driven home that point already during this segment of the video, but these are going to be rather weak in nature. We're not expecting any strong tornadoes. Really, the primary threat here is going to be the sustained winds as well as the heavy downpours and flash flooding with this system. But there still is the chance for a weak tornado in spots. Speaking of the flash flooding, I want to point your attention to the skew T. And as you can see, take a look at your dew point in temperature with height. When they're on top of each other like that, that means a very saturated column. And so what that tells us as forecasters is that we have very high precipitable water values, as we mentioned at the top of this segment, anywhere between 2 to even 2.5 inches. But then we also have here a very saturated profile. So this certainly is going to precipitate down to the surface. You have a very low LCL, basically at the ground level, and our LFC is just above that. So we are certainly seeing some heavy precipitation out of this storm, and that could certainly lead to some high rainfall amounts at times, anywhere between, I would say, 1 to 1.5 inches per hour in some of the more intense storms. And that's on the conservative side. May even see isolated higher amounts, especially in extreme southern Texas. So flash flooding is a concern, some weak tornadoes as that system moves west into extreme west central Texas, and also sustained winds, which I don't expect to be 50 for long. I think we're seeing those weaken a bit. Might see around anywhere between 35 to 40 miles per hour inland with some of those sustained winds, but as we mentioned, that's going to continue to move off to the west, and we should expect that to subside later on tonight and then eventually clear out by tomorrow morning. The other storyline impacting the lower 48 this week is going to be the extreme heat. And we mentioned at the top of this video is going to be impacting the lower Great Lakes back into the Central Plains. We're going to go day by day, beginning with today, for what temperatures we can expect. And as I mentioned yesterday, the worst of the heat is really going to be in the Central Plains. We're expecting highs today between anywhere from 103 degrees to even 110 in some spots in much of the central swath of the region, while the Great Lakes are expected to be right around the low to mid 80s with warmer temperatures away from the lake. Now, we do have excessive heat warnings going into effect tomorrow for the Chicago Metro and Milwaukee, as we are expecting a stronger regime of southwesterly flow. And you know what? Let me actually switch to black here so you guys can see it. You're going to see this strong southwesterly flow regime, which also is going to bring really strong moisture advection. We may even see dew points in some spots in the Great Lakes region, anywhere between 78 to even 80 degrees. So factor in both the dew point as well as the highs being in the mid to high 90s. Combine that, you're going to get heat indices well north of 110 in many of these localities, from the lower Great Lakes and even getting back into the Central Plains. We do see in Iowa for tomorrow highs in 107 as well as 104, really anywhere between 104 to 108. Both Tuesday and Wednesday, these maps are taken from the North American model, so keep that in mind. We've been using that a lot the last couple of days, and I think it's really going to pan out in terms of these temperatures. We may see these a little bit less or a little bit more, but it's going to be anywhere between this 100 to 105 range for both Tuesday and Wednesday across many of these areas, with locally higher temperatures in some spots. And then as we get into Thursday, things get a little bit more complex, right? So if you notice the trend, the central and southern plains continue to deal with the heat through this period. However, when we get back towards the lower Great Lakes, you notice this demarcation, and that's indicating a lake breeze. That is a huge question mark for if we're going to see the excessive heat continue into Thursday. We will expect to see the excessive heat prolonged in central as well as southern Illinois, but for our folks in northern Illinois and even southern Wisconsin, this lake breeze is certainly a question mark, because we talked about this yesterday and we'll mention it today. This lake breeze could actually help to shunt much of the warm temperatures in the southwesterly flow. You notice that you have northeasterly winds towards the lakeshore of Chicago and Milwaukee, and that could help to keep things cooler as opposed to what we see over in the inland portions of Illinois and Wisconsin. And that also goes for Iowa too. You notice that cooler temperatures to the north, you have around 70s and 80s, as opposed to the southern flank of the state where you're still seeing highs on Thursday anywhere between 100 to 104. So this is certainly going to be a big question mark going into Thursday, but you can certainly expect the worst of the heat to be in the Central Plains for both Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And then you also expect the worst of the heat for folks in Chicago and Milwaukee to be pretty much Wednesday, and then possibly Thursday, but there's still a lot of question marks with that lake breeze. We'll be updating you guys more about that in greater detail tomorrow as we continue to get more model guidance on that solution. But that actually could be the difference between seeing 100-degree temperatures near Chicago with the heat indices versus, say, 80s in Chicago and Milwaukee. So we'll certainly keep tabs on that and keep an eye on our video tomorrow. We'll be putting that out probably around the afternoon, where we'll be giving you the update on those. So stay tuned to that. And then finally, here is the latest ensemble going forward into the rest of the week and getting into early next week. As you see at the top of this run, here is your ridge, that ring of fire pattern, as it really starts to retract and retreat back into the southwestern portions of the U.S. But you notice that with that comes the collapse of your jet that rides over top, and you get sort of this troughing pattern to take place across the lower Great Lakes, getting back into the northeast. We could see some shower and thunderstorm activity later on towards week's end. Could be the potential for severe weather, but we don't really have much confidence in that right now. It's still too far out to really see what the ingredients are for that setup. But on the synoptic scale, with this type of pattern, sometimes you do get severe weather development with those little jet perturbations that take place right on the upper periphery of that ridge. But towards early next week, you see the ridge essentially become a little bit more constricted to the southwestern portion of the United States. That's going to keep the southwest once again very hot. And then for the most part, a lot of our activity becomes pretty weak. Our flow really weakens out here before we see it really re-strengthen towards later in the run. So there's a lot of questions on late next week, but at least as early next week is concerned, you certainly do see that ridge really start to retreat back into the southwestern U.S. Very high confidence on that. And the good news is, for those in the Midwest and the Plains, you can lightly expect temperatures to somewhat cool off a bit. They'll still be summer-like. I don't want to make it seem like you're going to cool down completely. But it is going to not be as hot, I would say, as what we've seen the last couple of days. I think we'll probably see temperatures in the 80s, maybe even low to mid-90s, but we're not going to be seeing any 100s, at least in the immediate term. But the models have been hinting at another heat wave beginning in September. That's still very far out. So I would say we're certainly not done with the heat, but we are going to be getting a little bit of a breather for the central part of the country, getting into late this weekend and possibly even into early next week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's video. And as I mentioned at the top of the video, if you do enjoy today's video, be sure to like and subscribe and share with family and friends. And we will see you all on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.